They auctioned my 4,800-acre ranch before sunrise, for the price of a used truck. I woke up at 4:52 a.m. to frost under my boots and a notice nailed to my gate. My 4,800-acre ranch, gone, sold, before I even had a chance to fight. No warning, no hearing. Just signatures that didn't belong to me. They thought they moved fast enough to bury it. They didn't know I was still reading the fine print. Stick with me, because what I found changed everything. If you've ever dealt with an HOA that pushed too far, hit subscribe and stay with me. This one doesn't end the way they planned. At 4:52 a.m., the world was still quiet enough to hear the hinges on my back door breathe. I stepped out onto the porch with a mug of black coffee, boots finding the familiar grooves in the wood without thinking. The cold hit first, sharp, dry Montana air that carried the faint smell of dust and lake water. Same as every morning, same as it had been for as long as I could remember. Except something was off. The gate. It sat about 100 yards out, framed by the first line of fencing my grandfather put up back in '51. I could see it clear from the porch. Always could. But this morning, something white caught the light. Wrong angle, wrong place. Paper. I didn't rush, didn't call out, just set the mug down and started walking. Gravel crunched under my boots, each step loud in the stillness. The cattle hadn't stirred yet. No engine noise. No wind. Just me and that piece of paper flapping slow against the gate like it had been waiting for me. By the time I reached it, I already knew. You don't spend 30 years reading property disputes and not recognize the shape of bad news before you touch it. Still, I pulled it free. Notice of foreclosure sale. The words sat there in clean, legal type. No emotion, no hesitation, just fact. My eyes dropped to the details. Property, Ward Lake Ranch, 4,800 acres. Status, sold. Time of sale, 8:30 a.m. previous day. Final bid, $52,000. I read that line twice, then a third time. $52,000. I leaned one hand on the gate, the wood cold under my palm, and kept reading like maybe the numbers would correct themselves if I gave them enough time. They didn't. Buyer, High Ridge Land Holdings, LLC. That name didn't mean anything to most people, but I knew how to read past a name. LLCs didn't buy land like this unless they were hiding someone who didn't want to be seen. And there was only one person around here who'd been circling this ranch like it was already hers. Lydia Cross. I didn't swear, didn't tear the paper, didn't do anything a man's supposed to do when someone steals everything his family built. I just stood there, boots planted in frost, hand on that gate my grandfather hammered together when this place was nothing but scrub and stubborn ground. $52,000. I'd seen trucks sell for more than that. Hell, I'd bought trucks for more than that. Behind me, the first hint of light started creeping over the ridge. Slow, unbothered, like the world hadn't just shifted under my feet. I flipped the page over. Legal language. Dense. Tight. Meant to move fast and ask no questions. Lien authority exercised under HOA enforcement statutes. Accelerated proceedings due to non-compliance. Notice served. Auction executed. Everything clean. Everything final. Except I hadn't seen a single notice. Not one. I scanned the document again, slower this time, looking for something out of place, something rushed. There it was. Service confirmation. Certified delivery. Signed. My name typed beneath it. But the signature? Not mine. Not even close. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding and looked back out over the land. 4,800 acres stretched out in front of me. fence lines cutting through dry grass. The lake sitting low and still in the distance, catching just enough early light to look like polished steel. That dam at the far end, old concrete and rock, holding back more than just water, holding everything. My father used to say this land didn't belong to us. We just kept it in one piece long enough to pass it on. 72 years, gone on paper overnight. I folded the notice once, clean, precise. Then I walked back to the porch. The coffee was still there, steam thinner now. I picked it up, took a sip. It tasted the same as it had 10 minutes ago. That's the thing about mornings. They don't care what happened while you were sleeping. I set the mug down again and reached into my pocket, pulling out my phone. No missed calls, no warnings, no messages, nothing. Whoever did this didn't want a conversation. They wanted speed, and speed only works when someone knows exactly which levers to pull. My eyes went back to the name. High Ridge Land Holdings, then past it, to Lydia Cross. White SUV, always clean, always slow when it passed my fence, like she was measuring something she didn't own yet. President of Sunset Meadows HOA. 3 years in the valley and already acting like she'd been here longer than the dirt. She'd tried talking to me once, stood at that same gate with a clipboard and a smile that didn't reach her eyes, said something about community alignment and future planning. I told her the same thing my father told developers back in the 80s. This land isn't for sale. She smiled like I'd missed the point. Standing there now holding that notice, I realized something. She hadn't missed the point. She'd just decided to go around it. I looked back out toward the lake. Still water. No ripples. No movement. But something about it felt wrong. Like a piece of it didn't belong to the morning anymore. I picked the notice back up and read the last line again. Transfer of ownership effective immediately. Immediate. That word stuck. Everything about this was immediate. Too immediate. Foreclosures don't move like this. Not clean ones, not legal ones, not unless someone inside the system is helping it along. I turned and walked inside, the door closing behind me with a dull, final sound. Kitchen table. Same place I'd sat 1,000 times. I laid the notice flat and smoothed it out. No emotion, no reaction, just facts. They sold my ranch. They signed my name. They closed it before I could even ask a question. And they did it fast enough that no one else had time to notice. I pulled out a pen and wrote one thing across the top of the page. How? Because that was the only question that mattered. Not anger, not revenge, not yet. Just one question. How did they move this fast? And more importantly, who helped them do it? Outside, the sun finally broke over the ridge, lighting up the lake in a way that made it look untouched, like nothing had changed. But I knew better. Because somewhere between midnight and sunrise, someone had decided this land didn't belong to me anymore, and they were counting on me reacting like a man who just lost everything. Panicking, arguing, chasing the wrong problem. I leaned back in the chair, eyes still on that paper. They moved fast. That was their advantage, which meant they made one mistake. They didn't think I would. I was on the road 10 minutes later. The county office sat 12 miles out. Low concrete building, same faded flag out front it had had for the last 20 years. Nothing about it had changed. Same parking lot. Same chipped steps, same feeling that everything inside moved slower than it should. Except this time, something had moved very fast. I pushed through the door without knocking the dust off my boots. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, and the place smelled like old paper and stale coffee. 2 clerks looked up, then back down just as quick. They knew me. Everyone in this county knew the Ward place. Dana Brooks was behind the counter. sorting through a stack of files like she was trying to stay busy on purpose. Mid-40s, sharp eyes, didn't miss much. She glanced up once when I walked in, and for half a second, I saw it. Hesitation. "Morning, Caleb," she said, but it came out a little too careful. "Dana." I didn't hand her the notice. Didn't need to. I need to see the boundary filing on Ward Lake Ranch. Latest version. Her hands stopped moving. "Caleb," she started, then stopped herself. Looked past me toward the back office like she was checking who might be listening. "Public record," I said. "You don't need permission to show me what's already filed." That was enough. She turned, walked to the back, and disappeared behind a row of metal cabinets. I could hear drawers sliding, papers shifting, the sound of someone taking their time when they knew they shouldn't. When she came back, she didn't meet my eyes. She set the file down on the counter between us. "Came in about 6 months ago," she said. "Amended jurisdiction map." I opened it. The first page was clean. Too clean. Fresh ink, digital lines, precise borders. It showed the valley like it always had, except for one thing. My land. The entire 4,800 acres was shaded in the same color as Sunset Meadows HOA, inside their boundary. I didn't react right away, just stared at it long enough to let it settle. "That's wrong," I said. Dana nodded once. "Barely. I figured you'd say that." I flipped to the next page. Survey certification, official stamp, county approval. Then the signature. Harold Jensen. My fingers stopped on the paper. I read the name again, slower this time. "Harold Jensen," I said out loud. Dana finally looked at me. "You knew him, right?" "I worked with him," I said, "for 15 years. Harold Jensen didn't make mistakes. Not with lines, not with land. And he sure as hell didn't sign anything 6 months ago, because he'd been buried 3 years. I tapped the signature with my finger. "That's not possible." Dana leaned in, lowering her voice. "I didn't process it," she said. "Came through approved, already stamped, already logged. Everything looked official." "Who signed off?" She shook her head. "Digital authorization. County clerk's office. No in-person review." "Of course." "Clean, fast, no witnesses." I flipped through the rest of the file. Supporting documents, survey overlays, legal descriptions that had just enough truth in them to pass at a glance. They didn't redraw the whole map. They shifted one line, just enough to pull my ranch inside HOA jurisdiction, just enough to give them authority they never had. I closed the folder. "Who requested it?" I asked. Dana hesitated again, then slid a second sheet across the counter. "Applicant. Sunset Meadows Homeowners Association. Representative, Lydia Cross." There it was. No more guessing. No more maybes. She hadn't just circled my land. She'd rewritten it. "Anything else?" I asked. Dana didn't answer right away. She reached under the counter, pulled out a separate envelope, and set it next to the file. "This didn't get filed publicly," she said. "Not yet." I opened it. Inside was a notice of lien. Amount: $48,600. Filed under HOA Enforcement Authority. Basis: non-compliance penalties, infrastructure damages, environmental impact. I almost laughed. "They're billing me for my own land," I said. Dana didn't smile. "They're building a case," she said quietly. Fast. That word again. Fast. Everything about this had speed written into it. The boundary shift, the lien, the foreclosure, no delays, No objections. No time for anyone to step in, unless someone made sure of it. I looked back down at the signature. Harold Jensen. Dead 3 years, still signing documents. That wasn't sloppy. That was deliberate. "Dana," I said, "this ever happened before?" She didn't answer immediately, just looked at me for a long second. Then she said, "Not like this," which meant it had happened. Just not this big. I gathered the papers, sliding them back into the folder. "Make me copies," I said. She nodded, already moving toward the machine. While it hummed to life, I stepped back and looked around the room again. Same building, same people. But the system inside it? Different. Someone had figured out how to move through it without friction, without resistance, without being seen. Dana handed me the copies. "Caleb," she said, quieter now, "if this is what it looks like." "It is," I said. She swallowed. "You going to fight it?" I took the folder and tucked it under my arm. "No," I said. She blinked, caught off guard. "No?" I shook my head. "Not yet. Because fighting now would mean reacting. And reacting was exactly what they expected." I turned toward the door, then stopped. "One more thing," I said without looking back. "Who logged the original filing?" Dana checked the system, fingers moving quick. Then she read the name. "Deputy Clerk Authorization. ID number only. No name, no face, just a number. Clean again." I nodded once and pushed the door open. Outside, the sun was higher now. The valley looked the same as it always did. Quiet. Open. Honest. But the lines underneath it had shifted, and those lines were everything. I walked back to the truck, folder in hand, mind already moving ahead. They forged a dead man's signature. They moved my land into their control. They built a lien to justify the theft, and they did it all fast enough that no one could stop them. That wasn't a mistake. That was a plan, which meant this wasn't over, not even close, because now I knew something they didn't expect me to find. And if they were willing to fake the lines on paper, I needed to find out what else they were willing to fake. I started the engine, gravel kicking under the tires as I pulled out. One question answered, a bigger one waiting. If the boundary never existed, what else in this case wasn't real? I found out the next morning. The mailbox sat half a mile down the dirt road, same as always. Metal box, dented on one side from a winter storm 10 years back. Nothing special. Until I opened it. The first envelope was certified. Then another. Then 3 more stacked behind it like someone had been feeding the slot all night. I didn't open them there. Just took the whole stack, turned around, and drove back up to the house. Kitchen table again. Same place I'd laid out the foreclosure notice. This time, I lined up the envelopes side by side and opened them one by one. Notice of violation. Unauthorized agricultural equipment visible from residential zone. Notice of violation. Excessive livestock noise exceeding community standards. Notice of violation. Improper water usage affecting shared environmental resources. I stopped halfway through and leaned back in the chair. They weren't even trying to be subtle anymore. Every letter carried the same header. Sunset Meadows HOA Enforcement Division. Everyone signed by Lydia Cross. Everyone dated within the last 10 days. 10 days. That's how long it took them to build a paper trail strong enough to justify a lien. And then a foreclosure. I flipped to the last page of the first notice. Fine. $500 per day. Retroactive. Of course it was. I grabbed the next letter. Same number, same language, same penalty. They weren't just stacking violations. They were stacking time. Charging me backward. creating debt that didn't exist until they decided it did. I reached for a pen and started circling dates. 10 days of violations. 10 days of fines. 10 days of non-compliance. Then the lien. Then the sale. All of it compressed into a window so tight, it barely left room to breathe. They didn't want me to respond. They wanted me buried before I even knew I was in a fight. A low-engine hum rolled past outside. I didn't need to look to know who it was. White SUV, slow, always slow. I stepped out onto the porch, letters still in hand. Lydia Cross didn't stop at the gate this time. She drove past it, eyes forward, one hand on the wheel like she was already done with the place, like it already belonged to her. 2 more vehicles followed behind her. Neighbors I recognized. New ones. People who'd moved in over the last year. They didn't wave, didn't look. Just drove past like I wasn't part of the road anymore. That was new. I went back inside and laid the letters out again. They weren't random. They were targeted. Noise, equipment, water. Everything tied to one thing. The ranch operating like a ranch. They weren't trying to fix anything. They were trying to redefine it. Turn working land into a violation. Make normal look illegal. My phone buzzed on the table. Unknown number. I answered. Caleb Ward. Pause. Then a voice I recognized. Sheriff Cole Ramirez. Morning, Caleb. Cole. Another pause. Longer this time. You seen the notices yet? He asked. I'm looking at them. Figured you might be. I leaned against the counter, eyes still on the papers. You calling as a courtesy, I said. Or is there something I should know? He exhaled slowly. They've filed multiple complaints, he said. Noise disturbance, livestock containment, environmental impact. Complaints from who? Residents. Of course. Anything official? I asked. Not yet, he said. But they're building it. Same word Dana used. Building. Not reporting. Not reacting. Building. They're trying to justify what they already did, I said. Looks that way. I glanced out the window toward the pasture. Fence lines still intact. Cattle where they'd always been. Nothing out of place. Any violations you've seen? I asked. No, Cole said. And I've been out there. That mattered. Cole didn't say things he couldn't stand behind. Then why call? I asked. Another pause. Because they're moving fast, he said. Faster than normal. And when something moves that fast, it usually means someone's pushing it. Inside the system. Same conclusion. Appreciate the heads up, I said. Keep your records tight, he added. Everything. I always do. I know, he said. That's why I'm calling. The line clicked dead. I set the phone down and looked back at the table. Violations, fines, complaints. Every piece designed to create one thing. Legitimacy. Not real legitimacy. Paper legitimacy. Enough to convince a clerk to stamp it. Enough to convince a judge not to question it. Enough to make the system move without stopping. I gathered the letters into a single stack and slid them into a folder. Labeled it the same way I'd labeled cases for 30 years. HOA. Enforcement claims. Then I added a second folder. Boundary filing. Third. Foreclosure. 3 pieces. All tied together. All built in less than 2 weeks. That wasn't coincidence. That was coordination. A sharp crack echoed from the direction of the fence line. I turned my head. Another one. Metal against wire. I stepped off the porch and walked toward the sound. Faster this time. Not running. just moving with purpose. By the time I reached the east fence, I saw it. Clean cut. 3 strands of wire, sliced straight through. Not torn, not bent. Cut. Deliberate. I crouched down, running my fingers along the edge. Fresh. No rust. No weather. Done recently. Very recently. Beyond the break, the grass was disturbed. Tracks. Cattle had pushed through. Not far yet. But enough. Another engine sound rolled up the road. This time, it didn't pass. It stopped. I stood up slowly and turned. White SUV. Lydia Cross stepped out, sunglasses on, clipboard in hand. Right on schedule. She walked up to the fence, looked down at the brake, then back at me. "Well," she said, voice calm, almost satisfied. "This is exactly what we were concerned about." I didn't answer, just watched her. She made a note on her clipboard. "Livestock containment failure," she said. "That's going to be a serious violation." "You cut it," I said. She didn't even blink. "Mr. Ward," she replied, "we've received multiple complaints about your animals crossing into HOA managed areas. They crossed because someone opened the fence. Or," she said, tilting her head slightly, "because your infrastructure isn't up to community standards." There it was. No denial, no hesitation. Just a shift from action to interpretation. I looked down at the cut wire again, then back at her. "You're building a case," I said. She smiled faintly. "I'm enforcing standards." Behind her, one of the neighbors raised a phone, recording. Of course they were. Documentation. Their version of it. I stepped back from the fence. "Make sure you get a good angle," I said, nodding toward the camera. Lydia's smile tightened just a fraction. I turned and walked away. Didn't argue. Didn't fix the fence. Not yet. Because now I knew something I didn't know an hour ago. They weren't just using paper. They were creating evidence, manufacturing it. Every violation, every complaint, every broken fence, built to support the same story. That I was the problem. That my land didn't belong. That the system was justified in taking it. I reached the porch and stopped, looking back once more. Lydia was still there, writing something down. Watching the cattle. Watching me. Confident. Because from her side of things, everything was lining up. Paper, witnesses, evidence, all pointing one direction. What she didn't understand was that I'd spent 30 years dismantling cases exactly like this. And the first thing you learn in that kind of work is simple. If someone is building evidence this fast, they're not worried about being right. They're worried about being first. I picked up the folder from the table, slid the new letters inside and closed it. 3 files. Now 4. Boundary. Violations. Lien. Foreclosure. Each one feeding the next. Each one built on something that didn't exist. And now, they'd added something else. Physical proof, a broken fence, a staged failure, a story they could sell. I sat down, opened a fresh page, and wrote one more word under the first question. How? Then beneath it, who? Because someone didn't just cut that wire. Someone made sure it mattered. And that meant this wasn't just Lydia Cross. This was bigger. And if I was going to stop it, I needed to see the whole thing. Not just the part they wanted me to react to. Because the moment I reacted, I'd already lost. And I wasn't losing this one. Not on their terms. Not on their timeline. Not on paper that wasn't real. But they didn't need me to agree. They'd already moved. The courthouse steps were still warm when I got there. Wednesday morning, Middle of the week. Middle of the day. The kind of time you schedule something when you don't want anyone important showing up. Two folding chairs sat near the entrance. One man in a wrinkled suit. Another leaning against the rail, checking his phone like he had somewhere better to be. No crowd. No bidders. No witnesses. That told me everything. I didn't walk up to them right away. Just stayed across the street, leaning against my truck, watching. The man in the suit checked his watch, cleared his throat, and started reading from a sheet of paper like he'd done it 100 timos. Notice of foreclosure sale. Ward Lake Ranch. Lien enforcement. His voice carried just enough to be legal, not enough to matter. No one interrupted him. No one questioned it. Because no one was there to. When he finished, he didn't even pause. Opening bid. $48,000. The man with the phone raised his hand without looking up. 52, he said. That was it. No competition. No hesitation. Sold, the man in the suit replied. He tapped the folder closed like he'd just finished a routine transaction. Because to him, it was. 4,800 acres, a lake, a dam, 70 years of history, gone in under 2 minutes. I didn't move, didn't step forward, didn't say a word. Because this wasn't the fight. This was the performance. The real work had already been done somewhere else. The man with the phone walked past me without noticing. Clean boots. No dust. Not local. A placeholder. The real buyer wasn't here, which meant I needed to find where they were. I crossed the street and walked into the courthouse. Same smell as the county office, paper and time. Clerk's desk to the left, filing windows to the right. I went straight to records. Need access to the deed transfer from this morning, I said. The clerk behind the counter barely looked up. Public record. Processing takes time. Not this one, I said. It's already been logged. That got his attention. He typed something into the system, frowned slightly, then turned the monitor just enough for me to see. There it was. Ward Lake Ranch. Status, transferred. Buyer, High Ridge Land Holdings, LLC. Filed 9:12 a.m., less than an hour after the sale. Fast again. Too fast. Pull the chain, I said. He hesitated. Ownership history on the LLC. That's not... It's public, I cut in, and I'm not asking twice. He studied me for a second, then turned back to the screen. More typing. More silence. Then a list appeared. High Ridge Land Holdings. Registered agent, Desert Peak Services. Owner, Mountain Crest Development Group. I felt it before I saw it. That name. Mountain Crest. I'd seen it before. Go deeper, I said. He sighed, clearly not thrilled, but kept going. Mountain Crest Development Group. Parent entity. Summit Valley Investments. And there it was. Summit Valley Investments. Registered officer. Lydia Cross. I leaned forward slightly, reading it again just to be sure. Clean. Layered. Hidden just enough that no one casual would follow it, but not hidden enough from someone who knew what to look for. She bought it, I said. The clerk didn't respond. Didn't need to. I stepped back from the counter. The room felt smaller now. Not because of the walls, because the picture had just come into focus. This wasn't an HOA enforcing rules. This was an acquisition. They didn't want compliance. They wanted the land. And they built the entire case, boundary, violations, lien, foreclosure, just to get there. I turned and walked toward the filing office. If they moved this fast on the front end, they had to move just as fast on the back, which meant mistakes. There's always mistakes when people rush. I found the deed copy before it was even filed physically. Fresh print, still warm. I laid it out on the counter. Legal description matched the boundary map, which meant everything hinged on that one forged line. But it was the bottom section that mattered. Development coordination rights. Exclusive. I read it twice. Then a third time. This wasn't just a purchase. It was a setup. The LLC didn't just own the land. It controlled what happened to it next. Zoning, subdivision, access, lake usage, everything. I flipped the page. There it was. Projected use, residential expansion, and lake access development. That's when it clicked. This was never about the ranch. Not really. It was about the lake, the water, access to it. They didn't need the cattle, didn't need the land. They needed control of what sat in the middle of it, and they thought they had it. I folded the document carefully and slid it back. No rush, no reaction, because the more I saw, the clearer it got. They built a perfect case, on paper, but they built it on one assumption, that the paper was enough, that ownership ended at the deed, that whatever they bought was everything that mattered. I stepped out of the courthouse and into the sunlight. The same man in the suit was loading his folder into a car. Routine. Finished. Done. Except it wasn't. Because they missed something. Not in the paperwork. Not in the speed. In the foundation. I walked back to the truck and sat behind the wheel, hands resting still for a second. Then I said it out loud. This wasn't about land. It was about the lake. And if they thought they owned the lake, they hadn't checked the right records. I started the engine. Dust kicked up behind me as I pulled away from the courthouse. They got their win. Their public moment. Their clean, quiet sale. Let them have it. Because now I knew exactly what they were after. And more importantly, what they didn't understand. If they built this entire operation around the lake, then the lake was the one thing they couldn't afford to be wrong about. And I had a feeling they were. I didn't go back to the county office, didn't call a lawyer, didn't file a single objection. That's what they expected. Instead, I drove straight back to the ranch, parked the truck, and stood there looking out over the land they thought they owned. Nothing had changed. Fence lines still held. Cattle still grazed. The lake sat quiet, same as it always had. If you didn't know better, you'd think the sale never happened. That was the first advantage I had. They changed the paper. They hadn't changed the land. Not yet. I walked inside, pulled open the old filing cabinet in the corner of the room, and started going through folders I hadn't touched in years. Original permits, survey maps, water usage records, everything my father told me never to throw away. Paper outlives people, he used to say. He wasn't wrong. It took me 30 minutes to find the first piece, a folded, yellowing document stamped with a date from 1953. Dam construction authorization. Signed by the state, signed by the county, filed before sunset. Meadows was even an idea. I set it on the table and kept going. Water rights permits, irrigation access records, maintenance agreements tied to the dam, each one older than the HOA, each one binding, each one still valid. I didn't smile. Didn't celebrate. Just stacked them in a clean pile and kept reading. Because if I was right, they didn't just misunderstand something. They skipped it entirely. An engine rolled up the drive sometime around noon. I didn't look up until the door opened. Ethan stepped in, boots dusty, eyes already scanning the room. He took one look at the table, Something happened, he said. They sold it, I replied. He froze for half a second. Then he nodded slowly. Walk me through it. I did. Fast. Boundary shift. Fake violations. Lien. Foreclosure. Shell company. All of it. No filler. No emotion. Just facts. By the time I finished, Ethan had moved to the table, flipping through the documents I'd laid out. His pace slowed when he hit the dam permit, then slower when he saw the water rights. He looked up at me. They don't know, he said. No. They think they bought the whole system. They bought the surface, I said. He tapped the permit. They didn't buy this. That was the second advantage. They assumed ownership worked in straight lines. Land equals control. Deed equals authority. But out here, it never had. I leaned against the counter. They're already moving, I said. Of course they are, Ethan replied. They think they closed the deal. I stepped toward the window. From the house, you could see the first stretch of the lake. And just beyond it, movement. Construction trucks. 2 of them. Parked near the shoreline. Workers moving equipment. Measuring. Marking. I watched for a full minute before saying anything. They're building, I said. Ethan didn't need to look. Good, he said. I glanced at him. Good? The more they build, he said, the more they commit. He was right. Every dollar they spent, every structure they added, every assumption they acted on, locked them deeper into a position when they couldn't easily walk back. That was the third advantage. Momentum cuts both ways. I grabbed the keys and headed for the truck. Ethan followed without asking. We drove down to the lake in silence. No rush, no urgency. Because this wasn't about stopping them. Not yet. When we pulled up, Lydia was already there, standing near the shoreline, clipboard in hand, talking to a man in a hard hat. She turned when she saw the truck. No surprise, no concern. Just that same controlled expression she always carried, like she was exactly where she planned to be. I stepped out and walked toward her. Ethan stayed back, watching, listening. Moving fast, I said. Lydia smiled faintly. Progress tends to do that. I glanced past her at the equipment. Docks? Initial phase, she said. Lake access improvements for residents. Residents, I repeated. Yes, she said. People who actually belong here. There it was. Not just ownership. Control. Narrative. She'd already rewritten the story in her head. This wasn't my land anymore. It was hers. And she was acting like it. I looked back at her. You didn't waste time, I said. Neither did you, she replied. I heard you were at the courthouse. Of course she had. Everything moved fast because everything was being watched. You should have come to me, she added. We could have worked something out. You mean before or after you forged a boundary and signed my name? I asked. Her expression didn't change. Allegations like that require proof, she said. I nodded slightly. They do. Silence hung there for a second. Then she turned back toward the lake. Construction will continue, she said. You're welcome to observe, but I'd advise against interference. Interference, I repeated. She faced me again. You're no longer the owner, Mr. Ward. There it was. Clean. Final. She believed it. That was the fourth advantage. Confidence. The kind that makes people stop checking. I stepped back. No interference, I said. She studied me for a moment, like she was trying to read something that wasn't there. Then she nodded once and turned away. Conversation over. I walked back to the truck. Ethan waited until we were inside before speaking. "She's not even hiding it," he said. "She doesn't think she has to." He looked out toward the construction again. "They're tying everything into the lake." "I know, and they don't understand how it works." "No," I said. "They don't." We sat there for a second, watching them build. Measure. Plan. Invest. Every move they made based on the same assumption, that the lake belonged to them. I started the engine. "Let them build," I said. Ethan nodded. "Let them build." Because every post they set, every board they laid, every permit they thought they controlled, was another step deeper into something they hadn't checked. And when the time came, it wouldn't be about stopping them. It would be about showing them. They never had it to begin with. I started with the dam. Not the lake, not the land. The dam. Because everything out here, every drop of water, every irrigation line, every shoreline dock, answered to that one structure at the far end of the valley. If they controlled the land, they thought they controlled the lake. But that only worked if they controlled what held the water in place. Ethan and I drove out just after sunrise. No rush, no reason to hide it. The dam sat where it always had. Concrete poured over rock, reinforced twice over the decades, maintained every year without fail. Nothing flashy, but everything depended on it. I walked up to the control panel mounted along the side. Steel box locked, same as always. The key was still in my pocket. That told me something important. They hadn't touched it. They hadn't even thought to. Ethan crouched near the base, running his hand along the inspection plate. "No new permits," he said. "None filed," I replied. He looked up at me. "Then they didn't check." I nodded. Or they didn't understand what they needed to check. There's a difference. One is a mistake. The other is ignorance. And ignorance is harder to fix. I pulled the folded documents from my jacket and handed him the first one. "Read the clause at the bottom." He scanned it, eyes moving fast. Then he stopped. "Read it again. Operational authority over water release and retention remains solely with the original permit holder or designated successor." He looked up. "That's you. That's the ranch," I said. "And the ranch is no longer yours," he said, testing the logic out loud. "On paper," I replied. He tapped the document. "This isn't tied to the deed," he said. "It's tied to the permit." Exactly. That was the gap, the one they missed. They bought the land. But the system that made the land valuable, still tied to something older, something separate, something they never claimed. Ethan stood up, looking back out toward the lake. "They're building off an assumption," he said, "that the lake is just part of the property. And it's not." "No," I said, "it's controlled." We drove back without saying much. Didn't need to. The picture was clearer now. They didn't just make a mistake. They built an entire plan around it. By the time we got back, the construction had spread. More trucks, more people, posts going in along the shoreline. Someone had already marked out what looked like a private access path, cutting straight toward the water like they'd been promised something permanent. I parked near the edge and watched for a minute. Every movement had confidence behind it. Schedules, budgets, plans. They weren't testing the ground. They were investing in it. That meant one thing. They believed they owned the outcome. I stepped out of the truck and walked toward the nearest crew. Hardhat turned, saw me, then looked back at his clipboard. "Sites restricted," he said without much interest. "Under whose authority?" I asked. He pointed back toward the vehicles. "HOA development. You'll need to talk to them. I nodded once and kept walking. Lydia was already on the phone when I reached her. She finished the call before acknowledging me. Back again, she said. Just checking progress, I replied. She glanced toward the shoreline. Faster than expected, she said. Turns out people are eager for access when you finally offer it. Access, I repeated. To the lake, she said. I studied her for a second. You've sold it already. Preliminary commitments, she corrected. Based on what? Ownership, she said simply. There it was again. That word. Clean, final, wrong. I reached into my jacket and pulled out the permit. Didn't hand it to her, just held it. You checked the dam? I asked. Her expression didn't change. Not relevant. It is if you're planning to use the water. We own the land, she said. That includes the lake. Does it? Silence. She tilted her head slightly. You're still operating under the assumption that you have leverage here, she said. You don't. I nodded slowly. That's what I wanted to confirm. Her eyes narrowed just a fraction. Confirm what? That you didn't check. For the first time since I'd met her, she paused. Just for a second. But it was there. A break. Small. But real. What exactly are you implying? She asked. Nothing, I said. Just observing. I turned and walked back toward the truck. Didn't push it. Didn't explain. Didn't give her anything she could react to. Because now wasn't the time. Now was the setup. Behind me, I could feel her watching. Thinking. Rerunning whatever checklist she thought she'd completed. That was the shift. Not in control, not yet. But in certainty. And once certainty cracks, everything else follows. Back at the house, I laid the documents out again. Dam permit. Water rights. Operational control. 3 pieces. All tied together. All separate from the land they thought they owned. Ethan leaned against the table, arms crossed. They're going to figure it out eventually, he said. Maybe, I replied, but not before they go deeper. He nodded. And when they do, they won't be able to step back without losing everything they've already put in. That was the point. Not to stop them, to let them commit. Fully, legally, publicly. I picked up the permit and folded it carefully. They took the land, I said, but they didn't take what makes it work. Ethan gave a slight nod. So what's the move? I looked out toward the lake, the construction, the movement, the confidence. Then back at the paper in my hand. We don't fight it, I said. Not yet. We let them build. We let them believe. Because belief was the most dangerous thing in this situation. Not facts, not law. Belief. They believed they owned it. They believed the system backed them. They believed they were done. And the longer that belief held, the more damage it would do when it broke. I set the document down and reached for a clean sheet of paper. Started writing. Not arguments, not defenses, actions, steps, timing. Because now I wasn't reacting anymore. I was building something of my own. And when it was ready, it wouldn't just challenge what they did. It would erase it, piece by piece, using the same system they trusted. Only this time, it would actually be real. I didn't go back to the fence, didn't argue with Lydia, didn't respond to a single notice, because everything they were doing depended on one thing, me reacting. So I stopped, completely. 3 days passed, then 5. Construction doubled, docks extended further into the water. New lots were marked off with bright stakes. Survey flags cut through the grass like lines on a map that didn't belong. And every day, more people showed up. Buyers, investors, families walking the shoreline like they'd already signed something. I let them, because the deeper they stepped in, the harder it would be to step out. On the 6th day, I drove back to the county office, not to argue, to file. Dana saw me coming and didn't bother pretending this time. "You ready?" she asked quietly. "I am." I slid the folder across the counter. Not thick, not complicated. Clean. Precise. "Application for Agricultural Preservation District," I said. Her eyes moved across the title, then back up to me. "That's a big move." "It's the right one." She flipped through the pages. Legal descriptions, boundary definitions, historical land use certifications, and at the center of it, the dam, the water, the operational control. "You're tying the district to water management," she said. "Yes. And environmental protection." "Yes." She looked up again. "You know what this does, right?" "I do. It gave me authority. Not over the land they took, but over the system that made it valuable. Water flow, usage rights, environmental impact enforcement. Everything they needed to sell lake access. Now ran through me." Donna exhaled slowly. "They're not going to like this." "That's not the goal," I said. "The goal is to make it legal." She nodded once, then reached for the stamp. The sound echoed louder than it should have. Approval received. Processing initiated. Filed. That was it. No confrontation, no fight. Just paper. Real paper. Backed by real law. By the time I stepped outside, my phone buzzed. "Sheriff Ramirez." "Word travels fast," I said. "You just filed something," he replied. "Big. Public record," I said. "Yeah," he said. "And so is what happens next." I leaned against the truck. "Which is?" "They're going to push back," he said. "Hard. Let them." Another pause. "You're not stopping construction," he said. "No." "Why?" "Because I want it finished." He didn't respond right away. Then, "All right," he said. "I'll keep an eye on it. Appreciate it." I hung up and looked back toward the valley. Nothing looked different, but everything had shifted. They still had the land. They still had the narrative. But now I had the mechanism, the part they never checked, the part they couldn't replace. By that afternoon, Lydia showed up. No SUV this time. Black sedan. Faster. More direct. She didn't wait at the gate. Didn't call ahead. She walked straight onto the property like she had something to prove. I met her halfway. "You filed something," she said. Not a question. "A district," I replied. Her jaw tightened slightly. "That impacts HOA operations. It protects agricultural land," I said. "That's the point. You don't own that land anymore." "I don't need to," I said. That stopped her. Not fully, but enough. "You're overstepping," she said. "No," I replied. "I'm operating." Her eyes narrowed. "This isn't going to hold," she said. "It already has." She stepped closer. "You're trying to interfere with development. I'm enforcing environmental regulation tied to existing infrastructure." We stood there in silence for a second. Two different interpretations. Only one of them backed by something older than both of us. "You think this gives you control?" she asked. "No," I said. "I know it does." That was the shift. Not loud, not visible, but real. For the first time, she wasn't certain. She turned away before I could say anything else, pulled out her phone, started dialing, calling someone, fixing something, trying to move faster again. But speed only works when you're ahead. And for the first time, she wasn't. By evening, Dana called. "They've got a problem," she said. "Which one?" "All of it," she replied. "They haven't paid property taxes in 3 years." I didn't say anything. Just let that sit. "They filed as a nonprofit," she continued. "But their activity doesn't match." Meaning the county's about to take a closer look. I nodded slowly. That was the second crack. First was the dam. Now this. "They built their whole system on gaps," I said. "And now those gaps are closing," she replied. Exactly. Because once the system starts looking, it doesn't stop. I ended the call and stepped outside. The lake reflected the last light of the day. Still calm, still quiet. But underneath, everything was moving. Permits, records, authority, shifting, realigning, correcting. I looked out toward the construction. Lights still on, work still going. They were pushing through, trying to finish before anything changed. That told me something. They felt it too. The pressure, the uncertainty, the beginning of something they couldn't control. I leaned against the railing, arms crossed. "Keep going," I said under my breath. "Build everything you can." Because every board they placed, every dollar they spent, every promise they made was now tied to something they didn't own. And when that line finally got pulled tight, it wouldn't just slow them down. It would stop everything, all at once. I didn't give them a warning, didn't send a letter, didn't call a meeting. Because everything they'd done up to this point had been built on surprise. Speed, control. So I used the same approach, only this time, it was legal. Ethan was already at the dam when I got there. Panel open, inspection tools laid out, everything documented, everything recorded. "You ready?" he asked. I looked out over the lake. Boats had started showing up. Not many yet, but enough to tell me they'd already begun selling access. People standing on unfinished docks, pointing, talking, imagining something permanent. They didn't know. Not yet. "Go ahead," I said. Ethan nodded once and turned back to the control system. He didn't rush, didn't hesitate, just followed procedure. Same one we'd used for maintenance cycles for years. Only this time, we weren't maintaining. We were enforcing. He turned the first valve. Nothing dramatic. No explosion. No sudden shift. Just a controlled release. Water moving through channels it had always moved through. Only now, it wasn't being held for them. I watched the lake for a full minute before anything changed. Then a slight drop, barely noticeable unless you knew what to look for. Then more. Slow, steady, unstoppable. "That's it," Ethan said. I nodded. "That's it." We closed the panel and secured it. Everything documented, every step logged, every action backed by the permit. No shortcuts, no gaps. Because if they tried to fight this, it had to hold. By the time we drove back down toward the shoreline, people had started to notice. One of the workers stood ankle-deep where water had been higher an hour ago. Another was adjusting a dock that no longer sat level. Confusion spread first, then concern. I stepped out of the truck and walked toward the nearest group. "What's going on?" one of them asked. "Water level adjustment," I said. "Adjustment," he repeated. "We just set these measurements yesterday." I didn't answer him. Didn't need to. Because behind him, the line had already shifted. Another inch. Then another. By noon, Lydia was there. No clipboard this time. No calm smile, just fast steps and a phone pressed hard against her ear. She ended the call the second she saw me. "What did you do?" she asked. "Nothing," I said. "The system's operating." "That's not what this is," she snapped. "Water levels don't just drop like this. They do when they're controlled." Her jaw tightened. "You're interfering with active development. I'm enforcing permit authority. You don't have authority here." I didn't respond right away. Just watched the waterline continue its slow retreat. Then I said it. "I control the dam." Silence. Not long, but long enough. Her eyes flicked toward the far end of the lake, then back to me. "That's not how ownership works," she said. "No," I replied. "It's how control works." Behind her, someone shouted. One of the docks had shifted enough that the supports were starting to strain. Workers moved fast, trying to stabilize it. Too late. Everything they built assumed a fixed level, and that level was gone. "You need to stop this," Lydia said. "File the request," I replied. "You're going to destroy property value. I'm operating within legal limits." She stepped closer. "This is retaliation." "No," I said. "This is compliance." That word hit harder than anything else I'd said, because it was the same word they'd used against me. Same logic, same system. Only now it wasn't working in their favor. Her phone rang again. She ignored it. "You think this changes anything?" she asked. I looked out at the lake again. The shoreline pulling back, the docks shifting, the buyers stepping away, unsure now. "It already has," I said. She followed my gaze, and for the first time, she saw it. Not just the water, the consequence. Everything tied to that lake, value, access, development, was dependent on something she didn't own, and now everyone else was starting to see it too. A man near the shoreline raised his voice. "Hey, what happens if this keeps dropping?" No one answered him, because no one knew except me. Lydia turned back toward me. "This isn't over," she said. "I know," I replied, "because this wasn't the end. This was the shift, from control to uncertainty, from certainty to risk, and risk spreads fast, faster than confidence." By late afternoon, the phones were everywhere. Buyers calling agents, agents calling developers, developers calling Lydia, and Lydia running out of answers. Sheriff Ramirez pulled up just before sunset. He stepped out, took one look at the shoreline, then walked over. "Level change?" he asked. "Controlled release," I said. He nodded slowly. "Permits in place?" "Yes." He looked back toward the lake again, then at Lydia, then back at me. "Then it's legal." That was all it took. One sentence, one confirmation, and the entire situation shifted again. Because now it wasn't just my word. It was the system's. Lydia didn't argue with him. Didn't try. Because she couldn't. Not here. Not now. She turned and walked back to her car without another word. No confidence. No control. Just movement. Fast again. Trying to get ahead of something that had already started. I stayed where I was. Watched the last light hit the water. Lower now, different. Not broken. Just corrected. Ethan stepped up beside me. "They're going to panic," he said. "Good," I replied, "because panic does something certainty never does. It forces people to ask questions. And once they started asking, they'd find the same thing I did. The lake wasn't theirs. It never was. And everything they built on that belief was about to fall with it." The county hearing room was already full when I walked in. Not standing room full, tents full. People packed into chairs along the walls near the doors. Homeowners from Sunset Meadows. Contractors. A few reporters with cameras ready, sensing something had shifted, but not yet sure what. At the front, Lydia Cross stood beside a long table stacked with documents. Her posture was still controlled, but the edges were gone. No more casual confidence. Now it was calculation. Good. That meant she felt it. Ethan took a seat behind me. Sheriff Ramirez stood off to the side, arms folded, watching everything without saying a word. Dana was near the clerk's station, already organizing files. Everyone in that room had been pulled there by the same thing: uncertainty. Commissioner Hall called the session to order. This hearing concerns ongoing disputes between Sunset Meadows HOA and Mr. Caleb Ward regarding land use, water control, and development rights. His voice stayed neutral, professional. But even he knew this wasn't routine anymore. "Ms. Cross," he said, "you requested this hearing. You may begin." Lydia stepped forward. She didn't look at me. Not yet. "Commissioners," she began, "what we're dealing with is a misuse of regulatory authority designed to disrupt lawful development." She gestured toward the documents behind her. "Our association acquired the Ward property through a legally executed foreclosure. We have full ownership and development rights. What Mr. Ward is doing, restricting water access, is retaliatory and economically destructive." A few heads nodded. People wanted something simple, something that made sense. Ownership equals control. That's how it's supposed to work. Lydia continued. "We've invested significant resources into infrastructure. Contracts have been signed. Families have committed. This sudden interference undermines not only property value but community stability." She turned then, looked directly at me. "We are asking the county to intervene." That was her move. Push it back into the system, force a decision before things got worse. Commissioner Hall nodded slowly. "Mr. Ward," he said, "your response." I stood. Didn't bring a stack of files. Didn't need to. Just one folder. I walked to the front, set it on the table, and opened it. "No dispute on the foreclosure," I said. "At least not today." That caught a few people off guard. Even Lydia blinked. "But ownership," I continued, "is only part of this." I pulled out the first document, held it up. Dam construction permit. Filed 1953. Still active. I placed it on the table. Second document. Water rights allocation. State authorized. Non-transferable without explicit reassignment. Third. Operational control clause. Separate from land deed. The room went quiet. Not confused. Listening. That's when it matters. I looked at Lydia. "You purchased the land," I said, "but you didn't purchase the system that makes it function." She stepped forward. "That's not relevant to property ownership." "It is if your development depends on water access," I cut in. I turned to the commissioners. Every dock they built, every lot they sold, every promise they made. I tapped the documents. Depends on control they don't have. A murmur moved through the room. Small, but spreading. Commissioner Hall leaned forward. "Are you stating that the HOA has no authority over water distribution?" "I'm stating," I said, "that they never verified it." That landed, harder than anything else. Because it shifted the narrative. From conflict to oversight. Lydia stepped up beside me. "We acquired full rights under a valid deed." I slid one more paper across the table. She stopped mid-sentence. "Chain of ownership," I said. "Follow it." She didn't want to. I could see it. But she did. Because she had to. Her eyes moved down the page. High Ridge Land Holdings, Mountain Crest Development, Summit Valley Investments. Then her name. Buried. But there. The room didn't react immediately. But they felt it. Conflict of interest, I said. Layered ownership. Undisclosed control. Now the murmurs got louder. Reporters leaned forward, pens moving, cameras adjusting. Lydia set the paper down, carefully. "You're making allegations," she said. "I'm presenting structure," I replied. I turned back to the commissioners, and I've already filed supporting documentation with the state. That was the next shift, not threat. Action, completed. Additionally, I said, the Agricultural Preservation District has been approved. That one hit fast. Some people didn't understand it. Others did. And the ones who did went quiet. Because they saw it coming. Commissioner Hall frowned. "Explain." I nodded. Under state law, the district has authority to enforce land use consistent with agricultural protection. That includes, I paused just long enough, reclassification. Lydia stepped forward again. "No," she said. "That's not—" "It is," I said. I looked around the room, at the homeowners, the investors, the people who thought they'd bought something stable. "Every property within the district," I said, "is now subject to agricultural valuation." Silence. Total. Then someone spoke from the back. "What does that mean?" I answered him. "It means your home isn't valued as a residential property anymore." I let that sit. Then finished it. "It's farmland." The room broke. Voices, questions, confusion turning into something sharper. Panic. Lydia raised her voice. "This is illegal." "No," I said calmly. "This is the same legal framework you used." I held her gaze. Just applied correctly. Sheriff Ramirez stepped forward then. Not aggressive, just present. Because he knew what was coming. Commissioner Hall raised his hand, trying to regain control. "Order," he said. "Everyone, order." But the damage was done. The shift had happened. Not on paper. In the room. In people's heads. Ownership wasn't simple anymore. Value wasn't stable. And the person they trusted to manage it was standing at the center of something they didn't understand. Lydia turned toward me one last time. "You think this ends here?" she asked. I shook my head. "No," I said. "This is where it starts. Because the truth doesn't stop at one room. Once it's out, it moves. Through records, through courts, through every system they thought they controlled. And now, it was moving. Not fast like before. Not hidden. Not quiet. This time it moved out in the open. Within 48 hours, everything Lydia built started collapsing under its own weight. Buyers pulled out first. Calls turned into cancellations. Contracts into disputes. People who had been walking the shoreline days ago were now standing in front of real estate offices, demanding answers no one could give. What did we actually buy? No one had a clean response. Because there wasn't one. Without stable water control, every promise tied to lake access became a liability. And liabilities spread faster than confidence ever did. By the end of the week, construction stopped, not paused. Stopped. Equipment sat where it had been left. Half-finished docks tilted awkwardly over a shoreline that had already shifted beyond their original measurements. No one wanted to build on something that could change overnight. That was the first collapse. The second came from inside the system. Dana called again. "They've opened an audit," she said. "On what?" I asked. "Everything," she replied. "Tax filings, incorporation status, Ownership disclosures. I nodded once. They didn't file clean, I said. No, she answered. They didn't. 3 years of unpaid property taxes, conflicting filings between nonprofit status and active development revenue, shell companies transferring assets internally without disclosure, each one small on its own. Together, pattern. And once a pattern forms, the system doesn't ignore it. It follows it. By the time the state got involved, Lydia's name wasn't just buried in ownership chains anymore. It was at the center of them. Sheriff Ramirez showed up that afternoon. Not alone. 2 additional vehicles behind him. State investigators, clean jackets, no uniforms, no noise, just purpose. They didn't come to the ranch. They went straight to Sunset Meadows. I didn't follow. Didn't need to. Because I already knew what they'd find. Documents that didn't match. Signatures that shouldn't exist. Money moving in ways that didn't hold up under light. By sunset, Lydia Cross wasn't making calls anymore. She was answering them. And that's when everything shifted for the last time. Not from me. From the system she thought she controlled. 3 days later, the county issued a formal notice. Sunset Meadows HOA, under investigation. All development permits, suspended. All property transfers, under review. Every piece of paper they'd used to move fast, now holding them in place. Ethan stood beside me on the porch as I read it. They're done, he said. Not yet, I replied. Because this part mattered. Not the fall, the resolution. A week later, the hearing room filled again. Different energy this time. Less noise, more weight. People weren't asking questions anymore. They were waiting for answers. Commissioner Hall read the findings slowly. Fraudulent boundary filing. Conflict of interest in foreclosure acquisition. Failure to disclose ownership ties. Tax violations. Each one stacked. Each one confirmed. Lydia stood at the front again. But she wasn't leading anything now. No clipboard. No control. Just silence. Based on the evidence presented, Hall said, the foreclosure of Ward Lake Ranch is hereby invalidated. That was it. No drama. No delay. Just correction. The property is to be returned to original ownership pending further legal proceedings. I didn't react. Didn't nod. Didn't move. Because this wasn't about getting something back. It was about putting it where it always belonged. Lydia said nothing. Didn't argue. Didn't interrupt. Because she couldn't. The system she used to move fast had caught up. And it doesn't move fast when it corrects. It moves thoroughly. Sheriff Ramirez stepped forward when it was over. Not to me. To her. Quiet. Professional. But final. She didn't resist. Didn't speak. Just walked. And that was the end of it. Not loud. Not explosive. Just done. Weeks passed. The signs came down first. Private lake access. Future development. Gone. Then the stakes. The flags. The half-built structures. Removed piece by piece. Some families left. Quietly. Others stayed. Not because they had to. Because they understood what had happened. And what it meant. The ranch didn't change. Not really. The fences stayed where they were. The cattle moved the same way they always had. The lake settled back into its rhythm. Controlled. Balanced. Real. Ethan took over more of the day-to-day work. Didn't ask. Just did it. The way it's supposed to be. I converted part of the land into something else. Not development. Not profit. Structure. A foundation. Legal support for people dealing with the same kind of thing. Because this wasn't unique, just exposed. We started small, a few cases, then more. Word spreads when something actually works. And what we built worked. One afternoon, standing by the lake, I watched the water settle after a routine adjustment. Smooth, quiet, uninterrupted. Exactly how it's supposed to be. Ethan walked up beside me. Strange, he said. What is? That it all went back to normal. I shook my head slightly. It didn't, I said. He looked out over the water, then back at me. No? No, I replied. Now it's understood. That's the difference. Not ownership, not control. Understanding. The land doesn't belong to whoever moves fastest, or files first, or builds the biggest. It belongs to the truth behind it. The parts that don't change just because someone writes something down. I looked out across the lake one last time. Same water, same land, same lines. Because in the end, they didn't take anything. They just thought they did.
And if they want thing, this whole map proof, if this ownership isn't just about what's written on paper, it's about understanding what you have, how it works, and what holds it together. Slap didn't win because he frowned louder or faster. He stepped back, paid attention, and let the just do the work. The lands, the water, the permits, do were there long before anyone tried to require them. And in the end, that was help. There's something steady about that. Not dramatic, not loud. Just walking your route and standing on it long enough for things to settle their way they should. If you ever deal with an HOA or someone trying to push your around on something that matters proper one in the common, if you ever had to stand your ground and let it just speak for itself, try yes. I read those and I know a lot of folks out there have stories just like this. And each story appreciate a story about real people holding the lines, doing things the right way, and not backing down though. When it counts, go ahead and surprise. Them are coming and I think you want to hear them.